You will leave with a whole new vision of who you are and what your place is in the world. You will leave with a whole new vision of what's important in families and what's important in bonds of love and what is not important in bonds of love. You will leave changing your stories, because you would have arrived with stories. This is my family, this is how they are, this is how my mother was, and you will leave with a whole different story, refreshed and renewed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Quest for Peace. I am Saju, and I am your host for today. And as always, I have a very special treat for you today. I have Shavasti here with me, who has come to us all the way from London. Hi, Shavasti, and thank you and welcome.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon to you. It's evening here, afternoon there. So
Yes,
thank you for inviting me to your podcast. I appreciate it.
thank you. But before we get started with you, Shavasti, a little bit about him. Um, Shavasti brings with him more than 25 years of facilitating family constellation workshops worldwide. Under the name John L. Payne, he has authorized two well known books on family constellation work. And under the name Shavasti, a well loved audio presentation entitled Teaching from an Awakened Heart. That sounds really interesting, Shavasti. I would love to hear more on that. Shivasti has students and clients all over the world and regularly visits the US for workshops and private client work. That's a lot. And you've been doing this work for such a long time. And it's so interesting that when I speak to people in the United States about family constellations, they have a blank look on their face and they go, "Well, I don't know what that is." So I think there are people who know it, but majority of people in the United States don't know what family constellation work is. So would you help us understand what that is, Shivasti?
That's correct. Yeah, it's family constellations is not as well known in the United States, although there are some extremely senior facilitators who are based in the United States who have also written books as well. So it's not as, but it is a very large country. But in terms of European countries such as Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, and the UK, family constellations is much more known, and you have a choice of different facilitators you can go to for weekend workshops. Um, so, family constellation work, not developed by myself, was developed by Bert Hellinger, who was inspired by the work of Virginia Satir and other sources for his work. So, his work started to become more popular in the early 1990s, and then it grew from there. And I first got involved in family constellation work in 1998. That's when I attended my first workshop, and that was in the Netherlands. So it's a way of looking at an individual as belonging to a family system. And so what we see in family constellation work is that feelings, beliefs, ideas, even traumas can be passed down from one generation to the next. And so we really focus on the events that happened in the past generations. So it's very common when somebody goes into psychotherapy, for example, they talk about how they feel about their mother or how they feel about their father. Whereas family constellations is more focused on, well, what happened? What happened in your mother's family? What happened in your father's family? And so people of specific ethnicities or who come from very specific regions of the world, there are common stories, things that have impacted their families in terms of trauma. And that trauma can be felt generations later. So, for example, when I was a young boy, if I heard an aeroplane in the middle of the night flying across, I would be afraid that they were going to bomb the house. Both of my parents lived through the Second World War. In fact, my father lived in London in the Second World War, which was bombed every night for 5 years. So that fear of an aeroplane bombing our houses was clearly inherited by me, and I distinctly remember that. And so we look at the events of what happened in past generations. And so I know that you are of South Asian heritage.
Yes.
And so one of the things that have impacted many, many Indian and Pakistani families was the partition of India in 1948. I think it was 1948,
I believe so.
1940,
Yes.
47 or 48, where more than 1.5 million people died during different massacres, etc. So many Hindu families had to flee Pakistan to go into what is now India, and many Muslim families had to flee India to go into what is now Pakistan. So that is a big national trauma that often impacts many Indian family systems, for example. But it's not only that, it's also the early death of parents, grandparents, and children that also have an impact on the system. So, for example, when parents lose a young child, it is observed that they often bond either too much or too little with the children that follow. So either the following child has got to replace the dead child in some way, or the parents don't have the courage to get close to that child in case the same thing happens again. And so we really are very events orientated. So we look at what actually happened in the family, which is really different to going into psychotherapy, where there's a lot of focus on how we feel, rather than the actual events.
Correct. So when you talk about the partition, I know my grandparents had to flee Pakistan and go into India to resettle, leaving all their belongings, their land, their anything. They only could carry what they could, and they had to leave and
Mhm.
start all over again. So it was a very scary time. I remember my mom telling me that she was but a little child when, this happened. And I never thought about this, that this could impact me, my kids, and so on. Correct? Does it go on?
Well, the trauma can get passed on, and what we do see is that we can often have a loyalty to it. Mhm. So I will limit my wealth, I will limit my happiness, I will limit my abundance, I will limit my joy out of loyalty to your suffering. I might even feel guilty that my life is so good because you, dear grandmother, suffered so much. You, dear grandfather, suffered so much. So I will dim my light and live a smaller life out of loyalty to you and your suffering. I've observed that a lot with family constellation work.
Even if you don't know that they suffered, or you just kind of heard about it, or is this something that you have to really know what happened, or is it subconscious?
It's subconscious, even if you don't know. Yeah,
I
even
see.
if you don't know. Yeah.
That is so
So
interesting.
if we think that the human being has an energy field, so does the family has an energy field as well.
Hmm.
And so all of the experiences of the grandparents and great grandparents exist within the bubble of the family energy field. And so we're swimming in that energy all of the time.
So not only the DNA is brought into our bodies, we have all the DNA on the cells that our parents or grandparents and all had. We also are taking on the traumas outside. The energy field outside of us is also being brought down.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Interesting.
So we don't live on an island. We're part of a family system.
Mm.
And so some people try to resolve their issues with their family by disassociating themselves from the family, by moving away, moving to a different country, moving to a different state, moving to the other end of the planet, having no contact with their family, and yet their family still exists within their energy field. And therefore they take the family and the loyalties and the issues and the entanglements with them.
So if, for instance, I were to work on with you and take care of the traumas, that means it's not no longer going to affect my kids or the generations to come after me.
That is the hope. As one person liberates themselves, the people that follow them also begin to liberate themselves as well. And so for you as a mother, the work that you do has an impact on your children. It's not guaranteed, but
Mhm.
it certainly will have an impact on you. Mhm.
Correct. So this is very interesting. So how did you even get into this kind of work, Shivasti?
Well, I attended a workshop back in 1998. I was a very reluctant attendee of the workshop. I'd heard about the work. It sounded a little bit like psychodrama to me, and I was not fond of psychodrama. But then I was convinced that it was very different to psychodrama, and it is indeed very different to psychodrama. And so eventually I went along, and then with my first workshop, I was hooked, absolutely hooked. I thought there's something happening here that is beyond normal senses. So, for example, we use representatives. So we ask someone to represent the grandmother, we ask someone to represent the grandfather. And so, in a very magical way, and I hesitate to use that word magic, the representatives have access to the feelings and thoughts of the people that they're actually representing without having any specific psychic gifts. And in one of the very first constellations that I stood in as a representative, I stood on one leg and I could not put my leg down. And the
Wow.
client said to the facilitator, "My grandfather lost his leg in the First World War."
Interesting.
So
Oh
I,
my
I
goodness.
didn't I had no idea why I was standing on one leg. I just stood on one leg and I couldn't put my leg down. So that really, really grabbed my attention. So the rest is history. I have probably given around 500 or more workshops myself. I literally travel the world. I just got back from Romania a few days ago. The week before, I was in Bulgaria. Week after next, I'm going to Cyprus. I've been to the United States twice this year. So my life is traveling and facilitating workshops of family constellations.
Oh, that's really amazing. So, how long ago did you say that was your first encounter?
1998.
1998.
1998. Yeah.
That's a pretty long time. So, from all the, can you give me a little bit more examples of how this can help someone? You've done this work for so long. Can you give us some examples of what you have encountered?
Well, the main thing is loyalty to the suffering of others. So, for example, it takes a very courageous young woman to be more happily partnered or married than her own mother.
Ah,
So just let that sink in for a while. hmm And so often a young woman, when she sees that her mother is unhappily married, unhappily wed, it's difficult for her to allow herself to be happier than her own mother. hmm And so we use healing sentences in family constellation work where there's a specific languaging that we use in order to get the clients to talk to the representatives to say, "Please bless me, mother, if I have the courage to be happier than you." So just feel that as a sentence. "Please bless me, mother, if I have the courage to be happier than you." That just that sentence alone can bring up a lot for individuals. And it doesn't really matter whether we're saying it to our mother or to our father, but
mhm.
frequently it's to the mother. Mhm.
That just gave me goosebumps.
Mhm.
So powerful.
So that is the kind of work that we do. So we work with those loyalties to unhappiness. It could be, please smile upon me kindly, Father, if I have the courage to have more than you."
Mm,
hmm Let's say our father came from poverty and we're wanting to create our life with more abundance and freedom, etc. To be able to say to our father who might have struggled with poverty his whole life, "Please smile upon me kindly if I have the courage to have more than you." Mhm. Or to say to an alcoholic parent, "Beloved father, there's absolutely nothing I could do to help you, but I remain your son."
So you don't have to say it to the actual father, you just say it to the representation.
You say it to the representation, yes.
Okay.
And it has a very, very deep impact. So one of my specialities is the language of the soul. And so this languaging of these sentences, I teach to facilitators around the world. It's really about the power of language and the power of making very simple and straightforward statements that come to the heart of the matter and the heart of the truth. Yes.
So you teach family constellations to other facilitators. You have workshops to teach
Um,
them.
no.
No.
Yes and no. So other organizations that teach family constellations to people to become facilitators often invite me in to teach a module on the languaging, about the use of language. So I'm not training people from day one to day whatever to become facilitators of family constellations. That's I have no interest in that. Other people can gladly do that and carry the responsibility for that. But often these organizations do invite me in to teach a module on the language. They're called healing sentences.
I
Yeah.
see. Yeah, because the two healing sentences you just said were very, very heart touching, heartwarming, beautiful.
They're very powerful.
Yes.
So when I work one on one with people, that's what we're doing. We're doing visualizations. So I'd have someone visualize their mother, then I'd give them a sentence to say to their mother and and then we see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. That sounds amazing. So, my podcast is called Quest for Peace. And as you know, it's not very peaceful out there right now. For,
Right.
the world is in chaos. And how can this help? How can we bring this into healing?
Well, my general observation is that when people are at peace with their parents, they are generally, for the most part, at peace with the world. So there are a couple of ways of looking at the world. You can either ignore reality and ignore what's out there, and pretend everything's fine. But what I'm talking about is generally looking at the world and being at peace with what is, rather than pretending that everything is okay. There's such a thing as toxic positivity as well, sort of pretending that everything is fine and okay. And it clearly is not fine and okay.
No.
But what I've noticed is that individuals that are constantly raging about the world and constantly coming up with new reasons to be afraid, new reasons to be rageful, new reasons to be angry at the world. My first question is, which parent are you still very angry with? So when people are not at peace with their parents, they're not at peace with the world. When people are at peace with their parents, they are more at peace with the world as it is, more accepting of the world as it is. That doesn't mean to say that I'm encouraging people to become passive and never object and never protest and never use their voice or their vote, etc., to change something. But there's a difference between being in a constant fight with the world and then looking at the world and accepting the world as it is.
So it's always about the parents, or can it be about siblings?
It can be either or, but sibling rivalries and sibling fights, it's often rooted in the family anyway. One child can be loyal to one parent and the other child loyal to the other parent, or
Correct.
grandparents, or it could be an unknown story in the family that is still yet to be sorted out. It could be because somebody has been excluded from the family. So we work with exclusion a lot. So the soul, whether it's the individual soul or the family soul, always seeks to include. And therefore, there will be anger in the family if someone has been excluded for any reason whatsoever. So that auntie that nobody talks to, that uncle that nobody talks to. So there was a falling out in the family. And so for 2 generations, that side of the family are never spoken to or never included. The soul will not allow that. And therefore, disruptions will turn up a generation or 2 generations later.
How about when abortions happen or miscarriages, and how does that affect the family in any way?
Miscarriages and abortions generally have a different impact. So the answer is yes, they can. So let me talk about miscarriages. And a lot of it depends on when it happened. So, for example, when a couple are expecting their first child, and let's say that child is miscarried, there's often a deep grief, and so mourning is required on behalf of the couple.
Mhm.
And so, what we often see is that the man will turn away from that situation because men have not been taught to deal with their feelings and emotions. and therefore the woman is doing the mourning for two people. And so that can create an impact within the family system. And so we work with that directly. A miscarriage that takes place late, let's say at 4 or 5 months, the impact of that is more or less that of a stillbirth. There is so the later the miscarriage, the deeper the impact. Now, I'm talking in very broad general terms because every constellation is different and every miscarriage is different, is different. But let's say we have a woman who has multiple miscarriages, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That has a huge impact on the children that might come. So there might be a feeling that my siblings are missing, my brothers and sisters are missing, and they may not even know about the miscarriages, and yet the feeling that somebody is missing is there. When it comes to abortion, it can either be felt by the following siblings or not. It really, really does depend. But the responsibility for the abortion lies fully with the parents. Family constellation work does not say whether something is either good or bad. We just simply acknowledge what is and work with it. And so the stance of the facilitator is neither to be pro-abortion or anti-abortion. We just work with abortion just as it is. And so it can have an impact, but not necessarily.
Okay. So for a person who's never done family constellation, what do they expect? Let's say you're holding a workshop and I show up and I have no idea what it is. What am I going to expect to see there as I enter the room? Can you walk me through that?
Well, a lot of that depends on your own personal expectations. What you're going to expect is a pretty intense time. It's quite intense work. You will leave with a whole new vision of who you are and what your place is in the world. You will leave with a whole new vision of what's important in families and what's important in bonds of love and what is not important in bonds of love. You will leave changing your stories because you would have arrived with stories. This is my family. This is how they are. This is how my mother was. And you will leave with a whole different story, refreshed and renewed.
So it's pretty earth shattering.
It's transformative. Yes,
Yes.
indeed. It
Okay.
is transformative.
So can you do this work one-on-one or online, or does it have to be with a group of people?
A family constellations workshop is done in a group of people and it's live. There are some people that do the workshops online. I don't do that.
Okay.
I'm extremely experienced. I do not like online workshops. I like the personal contact, and that's important. I do a lot of constellation informed sessions online with clients all over the world. And so I'll have private sessions with people and use the healing sentences and visualization. But an actual family constellation workshop is in person and it's in a group. And that group can be anything from 12 to 50 people. Really depends. Yeah.
Well, that's a large group, and in that case, would you be able to work with each individual?
No, I wouldn't. In the larger groups, no. So I give my smaller groups generally in the United States and also in Cyprus, where I do work with each individual that comes to the workshop. So it's about 50-50 with me. I just had 56 people on a workshop in Romania, and the week before I had 45 people on a workshop in Bulgaria. I don't get to work with everybody, but I do a lot of group processes.
And what is a group process?
Yes. So a group process would be mini constellations or exercises to do within the whole group.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been to one family constellation, and from what I could see, we were about six of us, and I'm just trying to let people know what it would look like. It's a group of the group I was in was a small group, five or six of us, and each of us got a chance to do the constellation, or and from the other, there's six, so the other five, I would choose who I would want to represent. Let's say my dad or my sister or whatnot. That's how you do it as well?
Yeah, that's exactly how I do it. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly how I work.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds
So
very, very
nothing's.
interesting, honestly. And I do believe you are coming to the United States next year.
Yeah, I am next year. I'm going to be in Syracuse, New York, and also Beaufort, South Carolina.
Okay. So we'll get the dates from you and put it in the information if anybody would like to join you there.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's on my website as well,
it's
the
on your
dates and
website.
telephone
Okay.
numbers and yeah.
Okay. So we will put all that information for everyone to
Mhm.
look at. Still very interested to know what other things that you might have, picked up or learned, with your workshops. Some more examples, if you could.
Oh, oh, many, 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 many things. I facilitate very differently to how I facilitated 25 years ago. I facilitate very differently to how I facilitated 10 years ago. So for me, it's very important to be very respectful of every client and respectful of their family system and not to have any judgment. So not to decide that this is a good family and this is not such a good family, or this is a bad family,
Mhm.
or this is a bad mother. This is definitely a bad mother or a bad father. And so it really is about being neutral and working with what is. So that's one of the things that I've learned over the years. And so to really work from the heart, not hesitate to tell the truth, but there are different ways of telling the truth. Truth can either be harsh or it can be an invitation to look at something differently. And so I always come from a place of invitation to look at something differently. Other things that I've learned is that loyalty to the suffering of others is stronger than most of us think. Loyalty to the unhappiness of others is stronger than most of us think. hmm
Mm.
And so it's quite easy to explain why a sister might be loyal to her disabled brother, because in some ways she pities him and feels guilty that she's the healthy one and he's the disabled one. So that's quite a fairly easy dynamic to explain. But our siblings don't have to be disabled in order for us to have that loyalty. So it doesn't have to be extreme. It can be very, 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 very subtle. So, for example, people can feel guilty for being the successful one in their family. People can hold back from more quote unquote success because they see their brothers and sisters struggling, and therefore they don't want to go too far ahead. They don't want to be excluded from the family by being the wealthy one. Or be, or if they come from an unhealthy family, let's say everybody's got diabetes in their family, do they really want to stick their neck out by being the healthy one, by being the different one? And so we see these loyalties all the time. And so they're very apparent in family constellation work.
That's interesting that you brought that up about diabetes, because that was my next question. How about people who have, for instance, got some kind of disease, like maybe even cancer, or I don't know, even maybe becoming paralyzed? Is there something going on in the past or the traumas and the families to create that in their lives?
Quite often we see illness is a result of unprocessed trauma within the family system. Yeah, yeah.
So it can happen that I have
Okay.
cancer, for instance. I mean, I don't have cancer. I'm saying a person might have cancer because of the traumas in the past. And if that
Correct.
has, if you work with family constellation and you take care of that, will the cancer go away?
Oh, I would never say anything like that. It's not a magic wand. Certainly, if we undo the entanglement, it gives the opportunity for the body to heal itself. Whilst I believe that every disease is healable, not every person is healable.
That's interesting.
Mhm.
Every disease is healable, not every person is healable.
Correct.
Okay.
And so, whilst someone can do a constellation and then go into remission with their cancer, and I know of such stories, it, it would not be true to say that family constellations can heal your cancer. That would be a very irresponsible statement to make,
Okay.
because it's actually it's offering false hope. And so we come and we look at the entanglements, we look at maybe some of the causes or reasons for the illness, and then we sit and we wait and see what happens. And remember, if part of the reason for the illness is because of a strong identification with or a strong loyalty with someone who has suffered in the past, those loyalties can be very challenging to undo. So part of
Right.
the work is revealing the loyalties. Oh yes, I've had clients that once they are aware of what the loyalty is and where it comes from, they dig their heels in and certainly do not want to give it up, because it gives them a sense of self-importance. I must be loyal to my grandmother. I must be loyal to my grandmother. Mm-hmm. They
Even
feel
after
that
knowing.
even after knowing,
Huh.
yes. Sometimes it even becomes stronger after knowing.
Wow. Why is
Well,
that?
they've given themselves a job. And if they give up the loyalty to the grandmother, then they are the terrible grandchild who's betrayed their grandmother.
That is so deep.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen that a lot. I have seen that a lot. Yes.
This work is so impressive, and I think it's so important for everyone to do this work, if
Mm-hmm.
nothing else, to create peace within ourselves so that we can be that, peace for
Indeed,
everyone.
indeed, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very, very exciting. Thank you so much for doing this. I also wanted to know what your thoughts are on peace. What does a peaceful world look like to you?
Peaceful world looks like that moment when I close my front door and pretend that it's not there.
Oh dear.
That sometimes works for me as well. I tend to find myself not as disturbed and troubled by what's going on in the world as other people. One of the keys is coming to peace with my own parents and coming to peace with my own past and my own history. Mm. The reality is, if you really want to hear what I have to say on this, is that we've never had it so good. Our
Mm,
generation is very, very lucky. If we only look back at our grandparents' generation, the amount of children that died of diseases at a young age, shortages of food and good nutrition, lots of wars, etc. And one of the reasons why we have the impression the world is so terrible at the moment is because we're all online 24/7. And so we're exposed to news that simply did not exist 100 years ago. If you lived in a small village somewhere, you didn't know that there was a war going on in Timbuktu. You had no idea. You didn't know that one country had invaded another. You had absolutely no idea. And so we are bombarded with media 24/7, which basically gives us totally the message all the time that the world is a dangerous place. But I am absolutely convinced that we have never had it so good. We've got our problems at the moment. We've got problems with the climate. We've got problems with our environment. We've got problems with pollution. We've got problems with the quality of our food. We've got, big issues with all sorts of things in terms of health and healthcare systems around the world. All of those issues are very, very real and they need to be tackled. But still, the quality of our lives is far better than it was just 2 generations ago. We've never had it so good. And I truly, truly fundamentally believe that. And I think that it will continue to get better. I'm not I'm not of the thinking that the world is on the precipice of becoming enlightened or anything like that. We will continue to struggle. We will continue to hurt each other. We will continue to cause pain. But people have a lot more access to information than ever before. And it all really depends what information they are accessing.
that's beautiful.
Hmm.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Yes, there is a balance. It's always going to be dark and light. There's a you know fight between the dark and light, and there's always going to be, there has to be a balance of the yin and
Mm.
yang. And that's what it is. And
If I think about it, my grandmother, my English grandmother, who was born in 1886 and got married in 1911, four of her children died under the age of 3
well,
of illnesses. That, certainly in the developed world, that never happens. Hardly ever happens any longer.
it's
And
true.
so that's what I mean. So the experiences of our grandmothers are not experienced today. That's what I mean, that life has never been so good. And I truly, truly mean that. And some people will look at me with incredulity at me saying that life has never been so good. But I do fundamentally believe that.
That's true. That's very true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shavasti, tell me about your books that you had written. What are they called and what are they
Okay.
about?
One is called The Healing of Individuals, Families, and Nations. And
Okay.
that's an introduction to family constellation work. And the other one is called The Language of the Soul, which then goes deeper into family constellation work and the healing sentences. And then I have an audio, and so both of those books published under the name John Payne. And then I have an audio presentation, which is 5 hours long, 11 chapters, called Teachings from an Awakened Heart. And it really is an ensemble of teachings that have emerged from within me over the past 25 to 30 years of facilitating different workshops across the world.
And that is to do also with family constellations.
No,
No.
no, no.
Okay.
It really is more about my spiritual quest and some deeper learnings and deeper teachings. And I also share about a very traumatic event in my life and what resulted from that, and also about my near-death experience and what resulted from that as well.
Would it be okay to talk about that here? A little bit of look into it?
Well, I had a motorcycle accident, and when I was in the emergency room, I left my body, and it wasn't a traditional near-death experience in as much as, my grandfather wasn't standing there. I didn't meet ancestors or anything like that, but I went into this, I passed through a ring of light, and I went into this black light, which I only just found out recently is not an uncommon experience to go into a black light. It was the only word that I had for it. And where I saw the earth as it is, with all of its ugliness and all of its beauty. It was very detailed in the audio book. I go into a lot of detail about the near-death experience. And I was just part of and surrounded by this very benevolent energy. And I just knew that everything was going to be okay.
How beautiful is that?
And I felt a great deep sense of peace. And what struck me is that the feeling of benevolence and love did not alter at all, not in the slightest, whether I was looking at something ugly or looking at something beautiful. It just remained the same. It was just constant feeling of benevolence. And so I came back from that near death experiencing, calling God the benevolence rather than God.
Beautiful. And how do we find these books and the audiobook on your website?
So the audiobook can be found on my website, which is
Okay.
shavasti.com, SHAVASTI.com.
Okay.
And there are also links to my other physical books as well on my website.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for talking to me, Shavasti. It was such an enlightening experience, and definitely I'm going to try and catch up with you when you're here in the United States to try
Okay,
it out.
good.
Yes, and
Wonderful.
I invite everyone to look into this, and it's so very profound. And if you're going through anything, maybe look into this and see what's going on in your family, in your traumas. It might help you go forward and live a better and happier life, perhaps. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we will be putting everything in the information section, the website, and all the information. So please go there and check it out. And once again, Shivasi, thank you very much for being here with us. And maybe we will talk to you soon.
Okay,
No,
you're welcome. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Quest for Peace, a podcast about navigating outer chaos with inner harmony. Whether you're seeking solace in the midst of life's challenges or simply curious about the profound connection between inner and outer peace, the Quest for Peace podcast is your guide on this transformative expedition.